is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today is episode 141 here, December 28th, 2022. One of the last few podcasts of the year. We're covering um, college football playoff, and the New Year's Six games. And then we're going to close the show with some Texas football recruiting. Uh, and joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
First of all, it's great to be back. Um, Episode 141. Probably, it's possible that this is our last podcast of 2022. I'm not exactly sure, but with all the festivities going on this weekend and all the sports that are on, it probably will be our last podcast of 2022. So for that, congratulations to us for putting out a bunch of content and making improvements to our podcast and growing our podcasts.
I think it was close to 90 episodes this year.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Throughout this entire year, and thank you to all of our fans as well for supporting us and continuing to watch and listen to our content that we put out, or that we try to put out at least on a fairly consistent basis. So thank you to that. And hopefully in 2023, we just continue to take off and grow. But today, it's great to be back. Hopefully, everyone's had a fantastic Christmas. Uh, Hopefully, everyone's having a fantastic holiday season and getting ready for a great new year. But with that, we have a lot to get to today. New Year's Six Bowls. It's kind of weird. There are a lot of not so great bowl games the weeks leading up to Christmas. There's that lull after the final regular or the conference championship games where there's no college football. Then there's the Army Navy game that really only diehard college football fans watch. And then there's like a week off, and then the bowl games start like a week before Christmas. And unless you're a real diehard, you're not really watching those games or a whole lot of those games unless you have nothing else to do. And then Christmas comes, and then after Christmas is when the real meat of the bone really comes as New Year's approaches. And we get our New Year's Six Bowls. We're going to be covering 5 games today, 2 of which are involving the national semifinals or the college football playoff. This is one of my favorite episodes every year. And then we're going to talk some recruiting, which hopefully we can incorporate more into our college football off-season topics going forward. And it's especially interesting here in Austin at the University of Texas and what they've been able to do this time around. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and kick it off with our first bowl game, which I believe is going to be on Friday, Tennessee and Clemson.
Yeah.
I'll let you start us off.
Yeah. Number 6 Tennessee versus number 7 Clemson. This one's interesting because there's this weird quarterback dynamic with both teams. Tennessee obviously had that amazing start to the season, beat Alabama, was, in the thick of things throughout the entire year until they stumbled late with those losses to Georgia and South Carolina. But I think it's clear that this team has a lot to play for in terms of tying together what was a very successful season and not ending with that sour taste in their mouth of losing what would be, I think, 3 of their last 4 games or all 3 of their last 3 games. So Tennessee, I think, has a lot to prove going into this, especially going into this with their backup QB. And then on the other side, Clemson, who it's hard to call it a disappointing season, but there was never really a point in the season where Clemson felt like a true powerhouse consistently. They flashed here and there. There was moments where DJ Ugalele, there were times where he flashed brilliance as well, but eventually I believe they did change their quarterback. Do you know their replacement's name? I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, but what I do remember is he did come in and provide a spark and for them to close the season well. So um, it's really hard to know how this game is going to go because we don't know a whole ton about these quarterbacks, um, other than just like what we've seen in the last couple games of the season. Um, but I'm leaning towards picking Clemson to win just because of what I think of their defense. Tennessee's defense, I think, they're solid, but they're not elite. And in order to, I don't want to say carry, but that because that has like a negative connotation. But in order to boost a backup quarterback, I think you got to have those the other side of the ball step up. And I don't know if Tennessee's defense will be able to do that to the fullest extent. So I'm gonna choose Clemson to win this game in a close one.
Well, this is the Capital One Orange Bowl. It's going to be played Friday night in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium, whatever it's called. CBS Sports has the line at Clemson -4.5, -110 on the money line. Over under set at 63.5. Yeah, the quarterback dynamic is what stands out in this game. Obviously, Hendon Hooker, it's so devastating. The season that he was having, I would make the argument he was the Heisman front runner for probably over half the season, in my opinion, especially after that mid-season win over Alabama, where they had to he had to outduel Bryce Young, last year's Heisman winner, and then the way that he played throughout, keeping Tennessee afloat in the college football playoff discussion up until late in the season. Didn't have his best game against Georgia, but a lot of quarterbacks struggle in Athens. Let's be honest. And then he had that devastating, I believe it was a non-contact ACL injury. But I think that might be a blessing in disguise for him and Tennessee, for that matter. As I think he'll come back stronger next year. They can sort of build on this. These New Year's Six games, they're interesting because you don't get a whole lot of opt-outs, at least less opt-outs than other bowl games that aren't the college football playoff or New Year's Six bowls. And it's just interesting because you do have injuries. You might have a couple guys here and there hit the transfer portal. You might have some guys opt out for the draft. So you don't really know what to expect, but these games are easier, in my opinion, to handicap than, say, the Alamo Bowl or tonight's Holiday Bowl between Carolina and Oregon, because those games just don't have the stakes that these type of games do. For Tennessee, you're looking to build off sort of a rough into your season, but a really good season for Tennessee's program. Josh Heupel's done a fantastic job in the 2 years he's been there. I believe he was probably the best hire of last year's or the year before last year's coaching hiring cycle, the cycle that included Steve Sarkisian. I believe he's done the best job of any coach hired in that coaching cycle, along with Lance Leopold at Kansas. I believe those two guys are like the front runners from that coaching hiring cycle, in my opinion. But yeah, the quarterback dynamic is what stands out. Obviously, for Tennessee, your offense isn't going to be at near as good without Hendon Hooker, but you do have an experienced veteran filling in. Joe Milton, he's a strong arm guy. He's not super accurate, and I do worry about that against this Clemson opportunistic defense, but he's strong arm, can push the ball downfield, and with the receivers that Tennessee has and the pace that they go at, I'm interested to see how Clemson responds to that. Obviously, we know Clemson's a very good, sound defense. They have been, but they haven't seen a team that goes quite at the pace and has the athletes on the outside like Tennessee does. Tennessee goes rapid fire. They're one of the fastest paced teams, as we know. We've said it all season, in the entire country. Now, I'm not sure how that dynamic changes though with Joe Milton? Will they slow it down a little bit? Is he as familiar with Josh Heupel's complicated offense as Hendon Hooker was? It's just a complicated dynamic to deal with for Tennessee. I do believe Tennessee has the advantage offensively in terms of play calling, obviously with Josh Heupel, the pace that they go out, the athletes that they have on the outside. And also, I do believe they can run the ball effectively against this Clemson defense. But I just think with the inaccuracy at quarterback and the spark that Cade Klubnik provided this Clemson offense in that whatever game that was, that last game that Clemson played, the ACC championship game, when they pulled DJ Uiagalelei, who ended up transferring and committing to Oregon State. That should be an interesting dynamic. Yes, I do believe Clemson will find a way to win this. They're more experienced in these type of games than Tennessee is. And I do believe that they're a little better situationally. And I do believe that Jalen Hyatt opted out and has already entered the draft as one of the best receivers in the award winner for the best receiver in the country this year. So with all that being said, I am going to agree with you. I am going to pick Clemson. But if I had to be a betting man, I would probably pick Tennessee to cover the 4.5.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, moving right along. Our next game is going to be the All-State Sugar Bowl between Alabama and K-State. I'll let you start off.
Well, the interesting thing about this game is for Alabama, although a lot of those receivers that had their struggles at points in times this season, but found ways down the stretch to make plays and are very talented players, have either hit the transfer portal already and are not going to play in this game or have declared for the draft. So I'm not quite sure what their depth chart looks at wide receiver right now. But the good thing for Bama, Bryce Young is playing and Will Anderson is playing. You have the two best players in this game. And it's going to give us probably one last chance to see both of these great players in a college setting before April's NFL draft. So I am interested to see that. And that's an interesting dynamic for the teams that are going to have draft picks in that top 6. So that's interesting. And then on the K-State side, they were, along with like the South Carolinas of the world and some other really good teams down the stretch, they were one of the hottest teams. And give credit to Chris Kleiman, what he has done coming over as the former coach of North Dakota State 4 years ago, building up this K-State program, getting them to their first Big 12 championship since 2003. What's been a really good program of years past. He's really elevated them with some uncertainty at quarterback this year. We had the Adrian Martinez saga that transferred from Nebraska, and then we had Will Howard, who played well for majority of the season and filled in for Adrian Martinez and gave this team a spark going down the stretch. And then I believe there was another guy that also played. I'm forgetting his name, but it was a revolving door at the quarterback position for K-State all season, and they found ways to win and give them credit for doing that. Beat TCU in the Big 12 championship game, a team that, if they play well, I do think has a pretty good chance of maybe giving Michigan a run for its money on Saturday. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And they have one of the most explosive, best offensive players, I think, in the entire country, in Deuce Vaughn at the running back position. He's small. He's good in between the tackles. He's good outside catching the ball. And he's just hard to see and hard to tackle in the open field. So a key, and this is always a key when you play K-State, they don't have the most explosive weapons on the outside, but they're very tight end and running back heavy, and you've got to be able to tackle well. If you don't tackle well, you're going to be in for a long day. So I think for Bama, a team that knows how to tackle well, a defense that wasn't as good as past Bama defenses, but is well coached situationally, and better up front on the defensive line. I think they have better athletes. I do think Bama will be able to do a better job of that than, say, some other teams that K-State has played this year. I do think K-State puts up a fight in the first half, and they hang around, maybe create a turnover or two. Who knows? We don't know what the motivation is for Alabama at this point. I'm sure it's there, and Saban will have the guys ready to play, but who knows? Uh, this is a chance for K-State to really catapult themselves into next season. And I just have the feeling that K-State's going to hang around because they're also a well-coached team, but they don't have the athletes that Bama does. They don't have the quarterback that Bama does. And I'm not so sure they can block Will Anderson. So I'm going to pick Bama, probably win this game by 10 to 14 points, but I do think K-State hangs around for about 3 quarters.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I don't really know how to feel about this game. Sorry for the camera shaking. This desk is kind of wobbly. But this game just has a strange dynamic because there's always, it feels like every year in this game in particular, you have a SEC team, whoever it may be, that is disappointed playing in this game, and then a Big 12 team on the other side that overachieved to make it to this game. So you have a talent disparity, but you also have maybe a motivation disparity and outlook disparity. And it's interesting to see which wins out. It seems like typically it sides with the Big 12 team, as it did last year, I believe, with Baylor winning that game. But this year, I just don't really see Alabama, messing around. I think running the football is going to be a large part of this game plan. I think, Kansas State defense plays very physical, but they're gonna find matchups outside, but I think Alabama's gonna look to establish the run first and foremost in order to get those one-on-one opportunities when you force Kansas State's extra defenders into the box. Um, if Alabama can establish the run, then I think there's a good chance they cover that spread. And that's what I'm gonna go ahead and pick. And it's not, an indictment on, Kansas State season or anything like that. I just think Alabama's the better football team at the end of the day, and I think the dynamic running backs Alabama has in their backfield, you can't underestimate that either.
Yeah, I think we largely agree. So with that, I want to do the Rose Bowl first, and then we can do the national semifinals. Not quite sure why the Rose Bowl is in the national semifinal, but I get it. It's Pac-12 against Big Ten. That hopefully will change soon, so it's not that way.
Right.
I do think it should be part of the bigger games in the national semifinals, but it's not. But anywho, for this year, as we know, last year we got a very memorable Rose Bowl game with that performance by Jackson Smith and Jigma in Ohio State. Remember that? With like the 5 touchdowns or whatever it was. Um, that was awesome. I believe they were playing Utah, if I'm not mistaken. That was one of the better games I've seen in this type of game. That's not a national semifinal or a national championship. But this year we get Utah again, and we get them playing Penn State. Now, I'm not certain the situation with Penn State right now. I'm not sure whether or not Joey Porter Jr. has already entered the draft. He's one of their better players overall and better defensive players. But for me, I was just overall so impressed by how Utah played down the stretch, especially in that Pac-12 championship game against um, against USC. Being able to win that game was very impressive. What they did to disrupt some of the things that USC's offense tried to do, very impressive. They're always been a physical team, well coached by Kyle Whittingham. The question for me with Utah has always been, what are you going to get from Cam Rising? You're very talented but inconsistent quarterback. Is he going to be the sort of somewhat sloppy, risk-taking, careless with the football, but really talented type quarterback where you maybe get 3 touchdowns, but you also get 2 picks and a fumble? Or is he going to play cleanly like he did for the most part against USC and go win you the football game, which he's certainly capable of doing? I'm just not sure what Penn State's situation is right now. They're a very well-coached football team. We saw them beat some very good teams throughout the season. I think this will be a pretty close game, but I'm going to pick Utah to win. No real rhyme or reason for it. These Rose Bowl games are always nuts, so anything can happen. But I do think Utah is the more physical and better team if Cameron Rising plays good.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you. Utah, I think, got a bad hand with how their schedule started and how their season started. Well, actually, that's not exactly true, but I do think if they hadn't lost that first game to Florida, they would have had a real shot at being right in the thick of things in terms of making the playoff. That's the type of talent that team has. So when you talk about Cam Rising, I just think he's shown that he can perform in big games over and over again. There are times where he struggles taking care of the football, but in this particular case, I don't think that will be the case in this game. And the main reason for that is I think this Utah offensive line will be able to keep this Penn State defensive line in check. Obviously, Penn State sends blitzes quite a bit, but Utah is battle tested, and I think they've played an underratedly difficult schedule with the slate they've had within the Pac-12, and I think they're the better football team at the end of the day. I'm not 100% sure who's Penn State's quarterback at the moment. Actually, I haven't watched much of them this year outside of the Ohio State game, but I believe is it Sean Clifford or
Well, last time I checked, it was Sean Clifford. I'm not sure what his situation is. Um, if I had to guess, he's probably playing. It's probably his last game that he'll ever play. I mean, the Rose Bowl is a very meaningful game. It's certainly probably, if I had to guess, there's probably a 95% chance that he's going to play. And if he is, he's experienced. He's probably played in this game before. But I want to go back to the point that you made about the schedule. And it's interesting because maybe at some point, these Pac-12 teams will learn to not schedule games as early in the season against SEC teams in SEC country. It just never ends up going well. Look at what Oregon did. They were in the same situation Utah was, as sort of maybe a college football playoff hopeful, a college football playoff sleeper team. Oregon clearly was not ready to go up against Georgia in Atlanta. They got
blasted.
beat. Yeah, they got beat. And look, I know Florida didn't have the greatest of seasons, but it's really hard to play in the swamp. I mean, it is hot and humid there in late August, early September. The fans are passionate. They're nuts. It's a hostile environment. And they have a talented quarterback, Anthony Richardson, a guy that's going to be drafted highly in, the next couple of years. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year. I'm not quite sure. But really talented NFL type quarterback, NFL type talent. Florida, it's pretty often that, these SEC teams, even if they're more middle tier SEC teams, have the better athletes up front than these Pac-12 teams do. It's just the lay of the land, the way recruiting works. So maybe Pac-12 teams will one day learn their lesson to not schedule these games in SEC country early in the season. I wouldn't call it a bad break. I would agree with you there, but just don't do it. Because if you don't do that, then you'd find yourself in a better situation, maybe in a college football playoff spot. But also, in 2 years, the playoff is expanding to 12, so that will sort of even itself out as you can afford maybe one more loss and still get into the playoff as a Pac-12 team. Who knows?
Yeah, that definitely will change things for sure. But as of right now, that's not the case, and you just kind of play with the cards you're dealt, and you can't slip up early in the season. That will kill your chances.
Right.
But yeah, I guess we're both picking Utah,
Yeah.
and with that, we can just move right along. Um, okay, next game. Okay, so next up is going to be our first college football playoff preview of the two. Our second to last game of the day before we get into our recruiting stuff. Is going to be TCU versus Michigan. Um, this one is just super intriguing just because of how incredible Max Duggan has been in close games this season. Um, if you look at what he's been able to do in the fourth quarter when trailing, or just in general throughout the entire season, and just in terms of the stats, I believe he's had like a 135 QBR for the entire season, and he's been completely flawless in one score games, other than the slip up in the Big 12 championship, of course. But I mean, an amazing season. But on the other side of things, you have Michigan, who has been there and done that. And I believe they're better than last year. And for a good portion of this season, you could have made the argument that they were playing the best football in the country. Maybe not. Maybe they weren't the best team in the country because, Georgia, they had won the national championship last year, obviously, and they hadn't lost a game. But I think there were certain weeks where Michigan played better football than Georgia, is my point. So I think Michigan has to get the job done just for the sake of that program. And TCU, if you're TCU, you're playing with house money. No one expected you to be here. So you got in, you did what you had to do, even with the slip up in the Big 12 championship game. And now you just got to get it to the fourth quarter by any means necessary. And I think, Sonny Dykes is going to pull out all the stops to be able to do that. Whether it be a fake punt, onside kicks. I think, trick plays. Like, he's going to pull everything out of his bag of tricks in order to keep this game close. And in the fourth quarter, I think anything can happen. But I am going to pick Michigan to win, but I do think TCU has enough horses to keep this thing close. And that might not be a super popular take, because I've seen a lot of people going the Michigan winning in a rout type of pick. But to me, I just think TCU, they're a bit like the Vikings in the fact that they've just been extremely clutch in close games, and whenever they need to make a big play, they get it.
Wow, that's a great comparison. In the fact that they wear purple, they
Yeah,
both wear purple. They both have they have good quarterbacks, really good quarterbacks, I think, that put up big numbers typically on a pretty consistent basis. They have good running games. They have some star receivers. Quentin Johnston is one of the best. He's going to be probably a late day one or maybe a day early day 2 type pick for TCU. He's a difference maker for them offensively. Super talented guy. I think with the time that they've had off, he's going to be healthy for this game. And it's sort of been a problem for TCU. Some of their skill players haven't always been the most healthy. But the good thing for them is they've had the past month or so after that conference championship game to get healthy, and they'll be healthy for this game. I think some would say that's a wild take, but I actually agree with you. I do think that, and I sort of hinted at it earlier, I do think TCU has first of all, the quarterback. I can make the argument that Max Duggan has proven it more consistently on a more consistent basis than JJ McCarthy has. Although you could make the argument that JJ McCarthy, just his raw talent, is better than Max Duggan. From like an NFL prospect standpoint, he probably is. But Max Duggan has done it more consistently at the college level. I can make that argument. And with what you alluded to, with TCU being like the Vikings, a high-powered offense that scores a lot of points, can put up a lot of points, but isn't super great defensively, but can make plays when it has to defensively. I do think that TCU has a chance to keep this close into the fourth quarter. And if they do that, it'll be interesting to see how Michigan responds. If you guys have to remember that Blake Corum went down with an injury, an ACL injury that puts him out for the season. He was, in some people's minds, a sleeper for the Heisman. I mean, he had that good of a year. He was up there with the Bijan Robinsons of the world in terms of running backs in the country. He was right there for the Doak Walker Award, which is given out to the best running back annually in college football. Bijan Robinson, of course, won the award, but Blake Corum was right there with him, along with Deuce Vaughn and some other guys. So I do think the key for TCU, obviously, is getting it to the fourth quarter, creating one or two plays either on special teams or defense to give you a short field, a turnover, maybe a special teams play, maybe one extra possession would help. And then obviously, you just got to neutralize the Michigan offensive line in this running game. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you cannot let Michigan start to pound the rock because they still have capable backs and Donovan Edwards and some other guys that behind that offensive line, which is full of NFL offensive linemen, if you let that get going, well, then you allow the play action game to get going. You let Harbaugh, go deep into his play calling bag, that sort of thing. And then this Michigan offense becomes really hard to stop. So you got to at least find a way to neutralize that matchup up front between Michigan's offensive line and your defensive line. Because TCU, throughout the season, they weren't a great run-stopping team. It was one of their weaknesses up until later in the year when they got better. So I do think TCU has a chance. They'll keep this game probably somewhat close early. It'll be sort of a feel-it-out type game. I do think it'll be sort of lower scoring early. But then come the second half, I think we'll see more of an explosion of points. But I do think Michigan will probably pull away and win by a touchdown in the end.
Yeah, I could see that as well. I think the thing that I worry about for TCU is maybe getting hit in the mouth in the first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
There's a chance they could come flat, but you could also say that with Michigan. Both these teams have a long layoff. And I kind of just think the first quarter maybe kind of slow, kind of feel each other out, maybe like a field goal here and there first quarter, and then the offenses will start to take off after that. But I'm really excited for this game. I think this game is being overlooked because of the two blue blood programs that are in the other game that we're going to get to. But I think this game has a chance to be just as entertaining. So that'll be that for that game. Now let's get to the nightcapper and the last college football semifinal between Georgia and Ohio State. Georgia, of course, they've been incredibly dynamic the entire season. Studs all across the board offensively. They have two incredible tight ends that they use in the red zone and on third downs that Ohio State will have to account for at all times. And then, of course, you have that physical offensive line in that running game that they bring to the table. And then on the other side of things, you have Ohio State, who um, CJ Stroud has been really good all season. I think that's fair to say. I think he solidified himself as, I'd say it's fair to say he solidified himself as a top 10 pick. I think it's early. We don't know a whole lot in terms of draft evaluations yet. We'll get to that later in the process, obviously. But as of right now, that's where I'm at with him. But I think the thing he brings to the table for this game is, I think his ability to maneuver in the pocket and extend plays is underrated. I think Georgia's going to try to bring a lot of pressure, and CJ Stroud has shown that he's able to maneuver around, extend the play a little bit. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he has functional athleticism. He can move around a little bit, and I think that'll be the deciding factor in this game. I think if CJ Stroud can get into his creation bag a little bit, that can really even things out. Because we know Ohio State, they're going to have to score probably 30, 35 points to win this game with how good, Georgia's offense it has been this entire season. They've been machine-like. And in the red zone, it seems like they convert touchdowns every single time. So Ohio State's going to have to find a way to be efficient, and they got to stay ahead of the chains and keep pace with this Georgia offense. But in terms of my pick, it's really tough, but I lean towards picking Georgia just because of how stacked that team is up and down the roster. Ohio State is capable with going punch for punch with this team. No doubt about it. But I think the edge will be a couple of big plays here and there in the passing game. I think third downs are going to be extremely important. And I also think Stetson Bennett is going to be able to find gaps in this Ohio State defense.
Yeah, I think, this is a matchup of, that's going to get eyeballs. I expect this game to get a good rating. It's a Peach Bowl, Georgia and Ohio State. It's really impressive what Kirby Smart has done at Georgia. I mean, it's really hard after you get that monkey off your back. You beat Alabama in the national championship game. You come in as the number one team in the country. You run the table this season. I mean, it's just hard after breaking through, winning that national championship, to come back again and keep that same intensity, game to game to game to game in the SEC, with an improved SEC this year that had the likes of Tennessee and some other really good teams. I mean, it was the typical grind SEC schedule, and Georgia just flew through it. I mean, LSU was a really good team this year. They blasted through them in the SEC championship game. So, yeah, I think Georgia is obviously battle tested. They're ready for this. Stetson Bennett has shown he can perform in big games. That was the question last year. Now that's not a question whatsoever. For Georgia, it's obviously just go to your bread and butter. 12 personnel, 2 tight ends with Brock Bowers, and then the other guy, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's a bigger tight end. I'll have to look up his name here in a minute. And then, with Lad McConkey and your other sneaky-ish receivers, build that passing game off your running game. I do not think Ohio State is good enough up front to stop this running game of Georgia's. And I think Stetson Bennett will be smart. He'll take care of the football, and Georgia's going to move the ball. The key for Ohio State is going to be, can they get stops inside the 20? Because in the red zone, situationally, can you force Georgia to kick 1 or 2 field goals instead of touchdowns? Because Georgia, listen to this. This is why they were so good, or one of the reasons. They were number 1 in red zone offense, and they were also number 1 in red zone defense. So they are flat out the best team, offense and defense, statistically, in the red zone. And so if you're Ohio State, you're going to have to get stops, maybe 1 or 2 in the red zone, because that, if you force them into 2 field goals, that's an 8-point difference right there instead of touchdowns. 3 instead of 7, 3 instead of 7, that's 8 points right there that you're making up for yourself without even having your explosive offense on the field. And then obviously it's going to be tough to hit big plays. Georgia has, first of all, they have a monster in the middle like they always do, in Jalen Carter. To me, he's sort of like a mix. He's not Jordan Davis, but he's also I think he has traits from both Jordan Davis and the guy who was drafted number 1, Trayvon Walker. I think he reminds me of like a mix of those two guys. He's not quite as talented as Jordan Davis, but he's very good. He's a monster in the middle of their defense. You're going to have to neutralize him somehow, some way. If you can do that, then you can get your running game going, and you'll be CJ Stroud will be able to operate efficiently from the pocket. But if you cannot neutralize him inside with your center guard combo, then it's going to be a long day for your offense. I do think Ohio State, as you mentioned, they certainly have the weaponry to go up against this Georgia defense. They're going to move the ball, but they got to capitalize in the red zone. And I think there's sort of an underrated factor here, the fact that Ohio State had a sour end to its season, losing to their bitter rival in Michigan in the way that they did on their home field. They've been sitting on that and being told how, soft or whatever that they are on defense and all this sort of stuff for the past 4 weeks. And meanwhile, you got people telling Georgia how great they are. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State comes out fired up and they take an early lead. But we all know it's the monster of Kirby Smart, the monsters down in Athens. I do think Georgia is going to win this football game. But I just hope for a great game. And I do think it could be somewhat high scoring. That 30-point thing that you mentioned, Ohio State's going to have to score 30, 35 points. I do agree with that. But at the same time, you look at teams that we said about that before, like the LSUs of the world, they scored however many points it was in the SEC championship game and still lost by 20. So you got to be very careful. But yeah, I do think it certainly will be an interesting game to watch. But I do think we'll end up getting Georgia and Michigan for the national championship.
Yeah, I can't stress enough for Georgia. They have to, play with composure and control the momentum swings. In a big, playoff game like this, momentum swings, go differently than a lot of the regular season games that you may have. Like a targeting call here or there, somebody gets ejected, all of a sudden you're reeling a little bit. They scored 10 straight. We've seen it happen over and over again in these playoff games. And I'm not going to get into the targeting rule, how I feel about it. I hate it. But knowing that rule exists and the things that can happen if you get a little bit off kilter. Um, they gotta stay composed and play their game because I think it's clear that they're the better team, more talent, like slightly more talented, but um, they got to dictate things.
Yeah, I agree. Are
I
we
hope
both?
that made sense. I know I was stuttering a bit, but there is one more game that I skipped over for some reason. I skipped over USC and Tulane, so I guess we can touch on that game real quickly, and then get into our final segment for the podcast. So USC and Tulane, um, what do you think?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the opt-out situation is with USC. I do believe Jordan Addison opted out, and so that doesn't, good for him. He's gonna make a lot of money in the NFL as a super talented former Biletnikoff winner as the best wide receiver in the country. You have Caleb Williams. Lincoln Riley, with a lot of time to prepare, is going to be dangerous. I think USC is hungry to get back at it after losing that Pac-12 championship and losing their playoffs, potentially playoff spot, losing that game to Utah. Tulane had a really good year. They're a well coached team. I've watched a couple games of theirs. They're really good, but I just think I mean it comes down to the quarterback at this point, and I just think Caleb Williams is too special for uh, Tulane to top them offensively, top USC offensively. But you never know with these games. I mean, Tulane's going to come to play. We know they got motivation. They're looking to show up and play well, put themselves on the map. Um, it was thought to be when K-State lost their first game to Tulane, it was thought to be a not so great loss at home. Um, but little did they know that Tulane would end up, being a really good team and playing in the New Year's Six Bowl against USC. So it ended up being actually a really good learning experience for K-State and also a spark for this Tulane team. So I don't know too much about Tulane and their roster and who plays for them and all that sort of stuff, but I do know they're a very well coached football team and they could probably compete with this USC team, but I just don't see them beating Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I think this game for USC matters more than some people may think. They gotta, if they want to be a blue blood program, they want to get back to competing for national championships every single year, perennially. If you want to get back to that, to win games like this, and you can't just win, you have to put your foot down. Um, and I think it's important for this defense to find something going into next year, just anything. They were embarrassed against Utah, just to throw it out there. I mean, it's just what it is, and I think they know that, and I think we'll see a much better defensive performance from USC this game, and I think that'll pay dividends going into next year. I'm going to pick USC to win by around 10 points, maybe 2 touchdowns.
That's fair. I'm super excited for all of these games, in particular the semifinals. I can't wait to watch those. But I was dying to talk about college football with everything that's been happening over the course of the past month since we talked about the conference championships. So yeah, with that, I guess we'll transition to our final segment of the night. And that's going to be recruiting. We don't talk a whole lot of recruiting on this podcast. I want to try to incorporate it a little more than we do in the off season of college football. Of course, once all this chaos is over, we'll talk about the coaching carousel as we get into, probably we'll do that in February after the Super Bowl's over, I would have to say. Once we get through the NFL playoffs and all that sort of stuff, we'll talk about some of the coaching hires that are interesting, and we'll start talking about recruiting as there's actually a second national signing day in early February, the final one for the 2023 cycle. That's the last time that these recruits can sign, and then it goes from there. We're on the 2024 cycle. But for this 2023 cycle, I'm going to give you guys an idea of what it looked like nationally, real fast, and then the purpose of this segment is to give you guys a breakdown of this Texas class, which is a really special one. And then we can talk about that a little bit and wrap it up in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So I also don't want to talk. I don't want to take up this entire segment talking. So I'll give you chances, Emmy, to intervene and sort of give your thoughts. So this is what it looked like on the national scale. Surprise, surprise, Alabama and Georgia finished top two in the On3 rankings. There are different recruiting sites. Most of them are very similar in terms of the national rankings, but this site might rank this prospect as a 5-star, while this site might have, this prospect as a high 4-star, not yet a 5-star. So it just depends on what site you use. I'm using On3's rankings. They're very similar nationally to everyone else's rivals, whoever you want to look at, 24/7 Sports. So Bama, surprise, surprise, number one. Remember all the shit that Jimbo talked in the offseason after A&M got the number one class last year about how Nick Saban, recruits, all the shit that he taught. Well, guess what? Saban kicked your ass this year with 7 5-stars, 24 stars, 1 3-star, the number one recruiting class in the country. With a raw score of 96.234. The highest score you can get, I believe, is 100. So there you go. Georgia, surprise, surprise, was number two. Only 1 5-star, though. They did get 22 4-stars and 4 3-stars. So 27 total commits. Alabama had 28. And then we get to Texas, the number 3 recruiting class in the country, their highest finish since 2012. To find a class that finished higher for Texas, you have to go all the way back to 2002, the class that finished second nationally. And guess that class had Vince Young in it. This class has Arch Manning in it. So there are some similarities there. Texas finishes with 3 5-stars, 11 4-stars, and 9 3-stars, 23 commits. So a couple less than Georgia and Alabama. They do have some of those 4-star guys that by February could end up being 5-star guys, and that could end up elevating them above Georgia. They're probably not going to get to Alabama's level, but they could still move up potentially as time goes on over the next 2 months or so after the season finishes up. Then you have Miami. Mario Cristobal, not a great season down in his first season at Miami, but he knows how to recruit. That place is going to recruit itself once it gets going. We know Miami is a national brand. Three 5-stars, 2 of which are on the offensive and defensive lines, which should help. 13 4-stars and 9 3-stars. And then rounding out the top 5, you had Ohio State, surprise, surprise, with 1 5-star, 18 4-stars, and 1 3-star. Only 20 total commits, but still a raw score of 93.26. So, and then Oklahoma, LSU, Notre Dame, Oregon, and Florida, and Clemson all rounded out the top 12. So, I was really surprised how Oregon did. They were really good. Dan Lanning is doing a great job. And then also Florida with Billy Napier, also a new coach. Not a great year at Florida this year, but they did really well as well, finishing inside the top 10. And then Notre Dame, a team that got better over the course of the season, also did really well. So there you have it. That's how it stands as of right now. Again, things can change over the next 2 months until the second National Signing Day happens. There are still some big recruits that have yet to sign. So things will change. Recruits' rankings will change as they finish up their seasons and they play in the whatever other games like show games that they do early in the spring. Um, but yeah, do you have any thoughts on the national rankings before we get into Texas?
Um, to be honest, I haven't looked into it a whole lot. And I don't really want to say too much without knowing much. So I guess that's just on me, man. I didn't really do much research. So, um, I'll just wait to add my 2 cents once I know more.
Okay, fair enough. So with that, let's get into the Texas class. So this, as we've talked about, we talked a little bit about it during the summer when some of these bigger like commitments happen, particularly the Arch Manning commitment. I'm going to basically break down the Texas recruiting class for you from a numbers and logistical standpoint, so you get a better idea of what's coming to Texas this upcoming season. Obviously, we all know from last year that they finished top 5 in recruiting. Stark's first full cycle. They finished 5th last year with the 5th nationally ranked recruiting class. That class was more offensive and defensive line centric. A lot of those guys have already made impacts, especially on the offensive line with Kelvin Banks, the 5-star left tackle, and then DJ Campbell, who I think is going to play tomorrow along with Cole Hudson on that offensive line. It was big on offensive and defensive line recruits, and they finished top 5 last year. But this year, the thing that's special about this year is this is a much more well-rounded and better, I think, overall recruiting class. They built the foundation on the offensive and defensive lines. Now they're just filling out their roster with high caliber talent. If you look at it from a logistical standpoint, there are, what did I say, 23 players in this recruiting class. They signed players from 7 states, so it just shows the competence of the staff at Texas, including Sarkisian, the recruiting coordinators, the coaches, the position coaches, the offensive and defensive coordinators, everything that goes into recruiting year-round, recruiting these high school players from all over, from the best high schools, the best talent beds in the country. It shows that Texas not only can just recruit Texas and the best players that are in Texas, but they can go to Louisiana, where they got 3 players. They can go to Florida, where they got 2 players. They can go to California, where they got two players. They can go all the way up to New Jersey to get a high 4-star in Sadir Mitchell on that defensive line. They can even go to Hawaii and get a 4-star linebacker. And they can go to Utah to get the best player in the state of Utah at linebacker and 4-star. So 13 players from Texas, and then 3 from Louisiana, 2 from Florida, 2 from California, 1 from New Jersey, 1 from Hawaii, and 1 from Utah. If you want to go a little deeper than that, 13 signees from the state of Texas, 9 of them are from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They do have a couple guys that you may have potentially watched in some of the high school state championship games, including from who was it that Vandergrift played again?
I think it was DeSoto.
Yeah, DeSoto. They got a couple guys from DeSoto, right. A couple guys from Denton Ryan. The bigger high schools, some of the better high school football players in the state of Texas. They went up to Dallas, Fort Worth area, natural recruiting bed in itself, extremely rich talent area, and they got some really good talent. Jonte Cook is a high 4-star wide receiver, one of the better players in this class, in my opinion. Played for DeSoto, was electric in that state championship game against Vandergrift. And he is one of those guys that I mentioned earlier that could potentially end up being a 5-star come February. He's just that good. Malik Muhammad, same thing. Really good cornerback. Texas is in dire need of cornerback talent, and they got that in Malik Muhammad. He's a high 4-star that I don't think will end up a 5-star, but he's really, really good. He's a blue chip prospect. Anthony Hill was a huge one, absolutely huge one. Texas, with what's leaving now, with DeMarvion Overshown entering the draft, Diamante Tucker Dorsey, the transfer, will play his last game tomorrow, and then he's off to probably the NFL draft. They're in dire need of talent at linebacker, especially at that middle linebacker position. Getting Anthony Hill, a 5-star, consensus 5-star linebacker, which means he was rated as a 5-star at every recruiting site you can find, just like Arch Manning was. That's what consensus means. He's going to really have a chance to, I think, make an impact right away, along with some of the other guys that I've already mentioned, like Jonte Cook and like Malik Muhammad. And then you have some other, high 4-stars who we'll see what they do as freshmen, but guys like Billy Walton as a pass rusher, Trey Wisner, who also played for DeSoto. He's kind of a hybrid wide receiver running back. I think he scored a couple touchdowns in that game against Vandergrift. And then some offensive linemen, Connor Stroh and Andre Kojo. These guys are all from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So a lot of it was going up to Dallas, getting talent from there, but they also got a 4-star receiver from Houston, Ryan Niblett, a hometown guy, and Colton Vasek, who they flipped from Oklahoma. He's a high 4-star edge rusher, and as we know, Texas is in need of playmakers off the edge on this defense, guys that can get to the passer. He's a guy that, along with, I think, Jonte Cook, come the spring, could end up being a 5-star out of Westlake High School here in Austin. And then Darian Gillette, another 4-star linebacker. The thing that stood out to me, I think, for this particular class is this is a really strong linebacker class, and Texas really needed that. They have Anthony Hill as the main guy, the 5-star, and then they have 4 other high 4-star linebackers in this class. This might end up being the best linebacker class that Texas has ever signed. And that's saying something. 3 5-stars. Arch Manning, as we all know, from Isidore Newman, the number 1 overall player in the country for most recruiting sites, consensus 5-star. Anthony Hill, as I mentioned, another consensus 5-star linebacker. And then Cedric Baxter, a running back from Florida. Yes, Bijan left, but they got another 5-star coming in. He's really talented. He's a consensus 5-star as well. So 3 consensus 5-stars in this class. They also got some high 4-stars as well, along with Jonte Cook, Malik Muhammad, Ryan Niblett, Colton Vasek, the guys I already mentioned. They got DeAndre Moore Jr., a wide receiver from St. John Bosco in California, a high school that I believe is ranked number 1 in the country when it comes to high school football. They are the cream of the crop, if you will. He's going to be a really talented guy that will make an impact in year 1 next year. It was sort of weird to me that Texas didn't go after more wide receivers. I do think they're going to go after probably 1 or 2 in the transfer portal. I just think they're waiting until after the bowl game ends tomorrow night to make their move. I think they're focused on their game against Washington, and rightfully so. Finishing with a 9-win season would mean a lot for this program in year 2 under Steve Sarkisian. But DeAndre Moore's a guy that I think will be huge next year. because you look at what Texas has done at the wide receiver position with Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington as sort of their main two guys, but they've really failed to develop that number 3 receiver. It's been sort of an inconsistent problem area for this Texas team, and I think DeAndre Moore is going to, along with Jonte Cook, those are two guys that are going to fill that in right away. But only 3 wide receiver recruits. They're really good wide receivers. Like the quality is high, but they didn't really get the quantity that I think I expected. That might be my one knock on this class, but they'll fill that with the transfer portal. I have no doubts about that. The last thing I really want to say is Texas, this recruiting class is pretty special in the fact that they have, I believe it's 7 signees that are ranked in the top 50 nationally. That is the most, I believe, in like over a decade at Texas. So they got some of the best, the elite talent on this in this recruiting class. You can call it the Arch Manning effect, yes, as most of these players committed partially because Arch Manning is coming to Texas. And they were able to flip some of these guys as well. I mentioned Anthony Hill. He was the guy originally committed to A&M, but ended up decommitting in late November and then committing on National Signing Day last week. And then also Colton Bassick, a guy that was committed to Oklahoma, but also decommitted and ended up committing to Texas. But 7 signees inside the top 50. And if in the last thing I'll say, in the national recruiting scheme, if you are a high 4-star or a 5-star recruit, you are called a super blue chip prospect. If you're a 4 or 5-star, maybe a lower rated 4-star or mid 4-star, or 5-star, you're a blue chip guy. But if you're high 4-star or 5-star, like the upper echelon of the upper echelon type guys, you are super blue chip. And these are the guys that Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and Oklahoma and the elite college football programs have been getting and building on for years. And Texas is finally seeing to get a grip on sort of these more elite guys that maybe a Georgia gets in a typical year or an Alabama gets every year. So Arch Manning, Anthony Hill, Jonte Cook, Cedric Baxter, Malik Muhammad, Colton Bassick, and Derek Williams, the safety, all in the top 50, and they're all super blue chip prospects. So I think all of them could be difference makers in their time at Texas. I think they're all NFL caliber talents. Now it's hard to tell from a high school standpoint before they've even stepped on a college football field, but it's some really good stuff, and I'm just so excited. So, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of local sports radio here in Austin, particularly the 104.9 station that covers a lot with this Texas football class. And one of the guys on that show, Rod Babers, talked about the similarities of the Chris Sims effect within, I believe it was 1999 or something like that. The effect that had in terms of bringing in other recruits, including himself as well. So that's the biggest thing that I see is once you get Arch Manning, everyone else will come and want to be a part of what you're building here. Another thing is, I think, like you said, it's important that Texas is willing to take those fights on in other parts of the country. Um, past coaching staffs, I think, have been reluctant to try those battles because they can be costly if you lose them. But I think those battles are worth fighting just so you can have a presence in different parts of the country. Particularly, I think the biggest one is Louisiana. Louisiana, we haven't been able to have a presence at all in Louisiana, and LSU has had the stranglehold on that entire state, and that state has a lot of talent. So presence in Louisiana, being able to build that year over year will be extremely important, and then um, also being able to go to Florida and California and be able to, you know, spread your presence around and find the players you want all over the country, the way a a top flight program should.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is actually the first year, and I believe 7 or 8 years where it hasn't been LSU that ends up getting the number one overall rated prospect offensively in Louisiana and the number one overall prospect defensively in Louisiana. They had signed um, those type of guys for like 7 or 8 years straight. They had gone to LSU. I mean, LSU just builds a fence around that talent bed typically when they're going right. Uh, but Texas was able to go in this year, and they were actually able to sign the best offensive player in the state with Arch Manning, and then obviously, or not so obviously, the best defensive player and a high 4-star safety in Derek Williams, Jr. So, yeah, that's really impressive, and I think you made a great point. Sark and this staff have done a better job of trying to win those recruiting battles outside the state of Texas. They're winning some of the bigger battles inside the state of Texas, which is great. I mean, you can build a national championship program just off the talent base in the state of Texas, in my opinion, especially with the resources that a program like Texas has. And it's obviously easier now to flip a program now that you can just dive into the transfer portal and get already made talent as well, along with to supplement the high school recruits. But yeah, I think winning those recruiting battles in other areas of the country is super important. Because if you look at Alabama, you look at Ohio State, you look at Oklahoma, you look at the elite programs, even the USCs now, the Miamis, the Tennessees, they're going to those other elite talent beds and they're winning those battles. But you're Texas. People want to go play for Texas. It's just how it is. I mean, you're in Austin, big games. You're going to the SEC eventually. You're playing with other great talent as well. People want to play for Sark, especially offensive minded players. The top elite of elite offensive players want to play for guys like Sark. And this is a program that's hopefully finally heading in the direction of getting back to at least contending for like being a consistent 10-win program that gets to at least a New Year's Six bowl or potentially in some years gets to the college football playoff. Um, that is what they're hoping to build as of right now. So, yeah, I think you just got to continue to stack these classes, and we'll continue to talk about recruiting come the off season.
Yeah, exactly. And um, the hope is that this roster will be able to win a Big 12 title. There's, you know, a lot of expectation that comes with that, but I think um, if you continue to stack up these recruiting classes, that expectation is completely fair and justified. So it's time to win, and the hope is that another year of this young offensive line, another year of Quinn Ewers, possibly, unless of course Arch Manning wins that starting job. Which honestly, I don't know how I would feel about that because we just had the true freshman quarterback experience, and it's very um, it's a roller coaster, to say the least. So I don't know if I would go for that again, but whatever the case is, it's time to win, and You got to put the player in there that's you're confident is going to win you games.
Absolutely. And I'll just wrap it up by saying tomorrow in the Alamo Bowl against a very good Washington team, the thing I'm most interested in, and I'm always hopeful that or rooting sometimes more passionately than I should that Texas wins tomorrow. I always hope Texas wins, but I'm honestly sort of more interested tomorrow or more, I guess, invested in the performance of particular players than I am about Texas at winning the actual game. That doesn't mean I don't care about Texas winning the game, but um, it would be nice to see Ewers put on a performance because he struggled mightily down the stretch. Texas relied heavily upon, of course, Bijan Robinson, the running game, Roschon Johnson, and the improvement of their defense to win games down the stretch. But now that you don't have Bijan Robinson and you won't have Roschon Johnson in tomorrow's game, although you still have really good running backs that are certainly capable, a deep running back room, and you'll still probably run the football well, as Washington's not a great defensive team. I think the pressure is put upon Quinn Ewers to have a really good performance tomorrow because if he doesn't, I'm not saying he's going to lose his job going into next season. Certainly, there will be a competition in spring ball and then next fall with Arch Manning stepping on campus. But you know how it is with Texas fans, with these boosters that Texas has, with everyone that's driving the ship with this program. The noise is going to heat up if he does not perform well tomorrow. I mean, it's just going to be what it is. With Arch Manning being an early enrollee, meaning he's not waiting until the fall to come on campus. He's coming start of the spring semester, January 9th. He will be on campus and he will be there for spring practices. So he's going to get a chance to learn the offense, show what he can do. He'll play in the spring game, I'm sure. Everyone will be curious to know how he does. We also have a guy in Malik Murphy who came in last year's recruiting class, who redshirted this year, who's been learning under Sark, that Sark raves about virtually every press conference. He was a high 4-star, 5-star, I believe, one of the recruiting sites, who has a lot of talent. If you don't play well, not only will you probably get pulled for Malik Murphy because Texas wants to see what they have in Malik Murphy, but you're putting more pressure on you going into the spring practices with Arch Manning coming on campus, and with the quarterback competition that could potentially ensue. So while I care about Texas winning, of course, it'd be super nice if they could win tomorrow. I think a lot of Texas fans would agree with me. Quinn Ewers' performance is like the thing tomorrow in the Alamo Bowl. So we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. And you could make the argument. I'm not saying that I believe this, but you could make the argument that Hudson Card was more consistent this year, particularly what Quinn Ewers showed down the stretch. Hudson Card played better than what Quinn Ewers played down the stretch. But of course, Quinn Ewers has the higher ceiling, and we've seen it. But it'll be interesting to see how he plays. I hope he plays well for all the reasons you said, and also just he just needs the confidence. It seems like um, there's been a bunch of games in a row where he just hasn't been as sharp um, from a mental standpoint. So that will be huge to see. Make good decisions, be accurate with the football, and play a cohesive game for 4 quarters.
Yeah.
So, it for this episode, guys. We did something different here to close that. I think that was a good segment for sure. I think in the future, we'll either move it over to our Patreon podcast, or maybe we'll, or I'll prepare for it a little bit more, so I can chime in more. But other than that, I think It was a good episode. It's good to be back. And I think we should be back for a NBA episode pretty soon, maybe, or even an NFL episode after this next week of football, because a lot can be decided this week in terms of playoff positioning. So stay tuned for that. Um, and we also are moving closer to Formula One. The grid is decided. The dust has settled on the grid, and all the um, team principles. So we can get into a little bit of that as well. But that's going to do it. I'm going to let Michael sign us off. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for leaving a like. Yeah.
Yeah, enjoy the football this weekend. I think as we'll give Emmy some time to sort of do some more research and look into this recruiting class, not only on a Texas scale, as I'm sure you just are overwhelmed with information, but also on a more national scale. So I know we probably have fans all over that aren't just interested in Texas, that probably want to know more about some other schools as well on a national landscape. So we'll be talking about that more. We'll obviously be back in the new year. We've got a lot to get to. I'm hoping that along with some of the NFL stuff that we do, we can get a national championship preview in. We will talk about that game that will happen January 9th. And then also, we haven't done basketball episode. We haven't been big on basketball yet this year, but we've just been so boggled down in football. But yeah, an NBA episode, or maybe we incorporate some college basketball as well as we enter conference play. Who knows?
I think
All
as the new calendar hits, that's when basketball really starts to heat up. So I think that's when we'll get into it a lot more. We'll dive a lot deeper and start looking at some of these races, particularly that an MVP race is looking really interesting right now, with some familiar faces and maybe some unexpected faces as well. So I'm excited to dive into all that.
Yeah, I think we can make a good trade-off. If you can, study up on your recruiting, I'll study up on my F1, and then we can just, make that little trade-off right there. I think that will work out well.
Yeah.
But anywho, we'll wrap this up, and I guess enjoy your new year. Happy holidays to everybody. We'll be back soon. And just like the year 2022, we are gone. Peace out.
Peace.